Today, James Ward was given a 10-month minimum prison sentence. He is still inside and he still has no release date. He is serving what is known as an indeterminate sentence called an IPP. It's imprisonment for public protection. Labour introduced them in 2005 and thought they'd apply to a few hundred serious violent and sexual offenders, but they were used far more widely. Ken Clarke, when he was the Justice Secretary, called them a stain on the criminal justice system, and they were abolished in 2012, but 3,300 remain in prison. Well, let's talk to Zoe Conway, who's been investigating this for us. And just to say, we will be discussing self-harm within this section of the programme. So you may find that upsetting and distressing. Zoe, tell us more about IPPs.
So imprisonment for public protection was brought in by Labour in 2005, but as you said, was abolished in 2012. But it wasn't retroactive. So that means there are still thousands of people in prison on this sentence. At its peak, there were 6,000 IPP prisoners. Now there are 3,300. So let's just look at the numbers and just how over their sentence they are. So 3,300 IPP prisoners in prison. Now, 85% of them have already served the minimum sentence, or tariff as it's known, and this is what's called the punishment bit of the sentence. So they've already done that bit of the sentence, and yet they're still in prison. In terms of just how over this tariff they are, we're looking at 465 prisoners who were given 2 years or less, who are now serving many more years than that. 465 have served at least 5 years on top of that tariff. And we're talking about some people who've served an extraordinary length of time. 48 prisoners have in fact served more than 10 years over their minimum. So they might have got, in the case of James Ward, 10 months, and yet 11 years later he is still in prison. So this is what is causing such concern amongst prison campaigners. This morning we heard from Nick Hardwick, the chairman of the Parole Board, and he's urging the government to act. He's been calling on the government for the last year to get a grip on this. He wants to put the burden of proof on the state, on the prison system, to prove that these prisoners still pose a serious risk to society. Because at the moment how it works is you get towards near the end of your tariff, you have to show a parole board that you're no longer a risk. Well, many people, including Ken Clarke, including Nick Hardwick, and actually also including the former Justice Secretary Michael Gove, are saying, how can a prisoner prove, sat in a cell, that they're no longer a risk? Has to be up to the state now to decide that. So Nick Hardwick feels the parole board has made some progress. 900 people have been released in the last year, but it's really now up to the government to move things along.
Why is it that it's taking so long, that there are people in so long?
Well, there are many reasons, but part of the problem is because there are so many more people in prison than was ever envisaged, the system simply can't cope. They're supposed to be able to access courses to reduce their risk. There are huge waiting lists for these courses. They might wait 6 months to get on a course, they might have to move prison. Then they have a parole board hearing, then they get told they've got to go and do another course, and they literally get stuck round and round and round. It has been called Kafkaesque. So last week I spent time with the Ward family, James Ward's family, who went to visit him in prison at HMP Garth. I spent the day with them and we filmed with them, and it was rather distressing because James has been self-harming. So just to warn you, this film does contain some quite distressing scenes.
Been a while since we've seen him last.
I don't think we had seen him this year.
No.
Bill and Christine Ward are preparing themselves to visit their son in prison. He's been locked up for the last 11 years. He's been self-harming. They don't know what to expect when they see him.
It's been hellish. Really has. I think this is the worst year I've ever done with James. It's touch and go kind of thing. He's, 1 minute he's up, next minute he's down. I don't think he'll die. He's like us, he doesn't know where he is.
When James was 17, he went to prison for a year for assault. Near the end of his sentence, he set fire to the mattress in his cell. For doing this, a judge gave him an IPP, or imprisonment for public protection, and said he should serve a minimum of 10 months. 11 years later, he is still inside. he has no release date.
It really does get to you. You can't sleep at night. You know, you get up, have a cup of tea, it still don't go away. It never goes away. I can't remember when I properly laughed. Last time I laughed.
The last time you laughed?
Yeah. I can't remember. I don't know what it's like to have a good time anymore.
James wanted to write to us, but he's not allowed pens because he stabs himself with them. So a nurse wrote his words down.
I was rushed to hospital last week as I cut up and lost a lot of blood. I'm still on constant watch. I feel ill-treated and I'm still not getting anywhere after all these months. I've spoken to my sister recently and she was in tears because of my self-harming. I owe my life to her, even if not to myself. I'm trying so hard to stay as strong as possible, but I couldn't promise her that I wouldn't do something stupid.
He shoved a pen in his arm, so he went to hospital that just for the blood poisoning. Basically James is saying that when he's crying out for help he's not getting any, and that's why we're so dedicated, you know, to getting him home, because we've got 100% dedication. James is just a number to them. You know, he's our family member, he's my brother, we can look after him, we can get him the right help, you know, and every day we could be with him and step by step we can get him there.
In order to be released, IPP prisoners must prove to a parole board that they're no longer a risk to society. That might sound straightforward, but many have struggled to access the programmes designed to reduce that risk. The system has struggled to cope. Some people watching this will say he must have done things in prison to deserve him being kept there this long, that this 11 years has to be for a reason. It has to be his fault.
I can't stress enough how untrue that is. A mattress fire, as you know, a piece of paper has been set on fire. James just chucked his bed about around the cell a little bit. This does not, I can't stress enough, he's not dangerous. He's never been violent for the 11 years in prison. The officers said that they never feel unsafe around James.
James's parole hearings have been delayed repeatedly because the prison service has failed to carry out vital mental health assessments. His upcoming hearing in September is more than a year behind schedule.
I dread getting up in the morning because I don't know what's going to be coming in that day. What's going to happen? Is it going to be a knock on the door, going to get a phone call, or whatever?
A phone call to say what?
I've took his own life, and that's what I believe he will do. If we can't get him out, I think that's what it's going to be.
That he'll take his own life?
Eventually.
He will do. Eventually he will do. Because he don't see any way out. I can't.
This is the first visit by James's family since he returned from hospital. James feels so unsafe on the main wing here at Garth Prison that he deliberately behaves badly to get himself put in the segregation unit. The Chief Inspector of Prisons wrote a damning report about Garth earlier this year. It was called Very Unsafe, and the segregation unit was said to be full of prisoners seeking sanctuary. Some had severe mental health needs. The living conditions there were very poor, and the staff overwhelmed.
He is not sleeping. He has lost weight.
Pippa Carruthers has been representing James for the last 6 years. She says key paperwork is still missing. So the parole board is meant to meet on the 6th of September. How optimistic are you that the board is actually going to be able to make a decision about what to do with James?
We're now less than a month away from the hearing, where potentially the parole board will still not have the information it needs in order to make a thorough, realistic decision about whether James can be managed in the community. A further knockback, particularly in circumstances where I will have to explain to him that some of the reasons are because of things that haven't been available or done thoroughly enough or made available to the parole board, will be extremely difficult for him to understand and to take.
James's family may have got used to hearing about his self-harming, but they're unprepared for just how ill he looked on the visit.
we've got in there, James looked absolutely terrible. His skin's yellow, he's lost so much weight, and his self-harm is unbelievable. And they're just leaving him there to rot. He cannot cope with prison. This is not just about mental illness, he cannot cope in there. He was on a wing, he thought he was doing okay, they found out he was an IPP prisoner. And that makes him vulnerable, and then they want him to do silly things, and if he doesn't cooperate with them, they bully him. So he's had to segregate himself again, which means causing problems, causing trouble. So obviously that looks bad for the fact that he has to misbehave to get himself in the block, to protect himself. And then because he's on constant watch because of the self-harm, he's literally sat behind a cage like an animal, where they walk past and point and laugh at him. How is that humane? Why is that? How is that human rights?